Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm your host today, Jordan Youkilis, and I am very excited to be interviewing my friend, Jeff Samuels of Frontier Risk Group. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Jordan. A pleasure, and appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for joining the show, man. Well, so would love to hear a little bit about your background and how you got involved at Frontier Risk Group.
Yeah, for sure. It's as everybody knows, cannabis is dog ears. So I'll kind of get into it briefly, and we can dive in. But born and raised in New York, about an hour north of the city. Spent four sunny years at University of Arizona, and then about 13 years in New York City. And so my career in cannabis kind of came to be going from early days, like 2009, I started as a MarTech SaaS entrepreneur and salesperson, fighting through the ranks and really kind of earning my stripes as just a seller in business. And in about 2015, as fintech started taking off, I had a relationship to insurance just through family business. It was something I was always interested in, and I saw technology and SaaS kind of bleeding over into insurance and what we call insurtech today. And so that's what originally got me involved in insurance in general, which is an interesting timeline because at that time, New York had just passed its Compassionate Care Act around 2015, and the networking kind of circle was really starting to take off. And so people like Michael Zaitsev from High NY started hosting meetups. And, Steve D'Angelo would come out from the West Coast and, the early members of the Casa team. And it was really just something that I kind of took a passion to. And if you can kind of like tell from the room here, like I've always been into cannabis as, from a consumption standpoint. I'm a music lover. I love the arts. Like I'm I guess a creative person in general. And so I already had that relationship with cannabis, and just kind of seeing the scene early days of High NY and just the entrepreneurs coming from outside of New York to the state and telling us what's going on in Colorado, what's going on in California, and just kind of like learning these stories and going from the consumption piece to these are the social justice issues, these are the business problems. I just fell in love with it. And so it was kind of a perfect storm where, again, like insurtech was taking off. I was a very early member of a business there that was looking at innovative industries and insuring innovative industries. And so like the very direct way I got involved beyond the networking was my first client in end of 2015, 16 was LeafLink. And I met Ryan Smith really early, knowing technology, I thought it was a phenomenal business. Yeah. And that started, kickstarted my niche and again, like my passion beyond just the education of cannabis.
That's great. And I don't know if you knew this, but we actually recently invested in LeafLink. So fully agree. It's a great tech business.
No, they've had quite a run. So
totally. So tell me about, getting into cannabis, coming from, I guess, traditional insurtech, right? Like you talk about, what are some of the idiosyncrasies you found in this sector?
Yeah, I think, just looking at plant touching side of the business, this is something that like everybody from the application phase onward has seen insurance is a requirement. And so regardless of what state you're in, regardless of what your feelings are towards insurance and all these things, it's critical. It's required to get your license and to be up and operational. And I think when you think about good legal support, the right accountants, insurance is in that same bucket of service providers and critical service providers. And the people and the social issues, the legal issues are obviously the most important. But when you get to, okay, I applied, I won a license, I'm operating this business in cannabis, as you guys know, Jordan, everything is compliance. And so that obviously speaks directly to insurance. I think I've seen from, about 8 years doing it, it's not just like, let's check the box. These companies are very much, they're flying the plane while they're building it, which is the analogy that is just kind of like so directed to cannabis. And, you know, I've seen just as recent as yesterday, like companies have claims and issues all the time. If you're in cannabis and you're scaling your business and doing something positive, you're probably going to get sued. And it's just the nature of it. And so I think it's the duality of, we're in a new space, it's highly regulated, and we need to manage our risk. Mm-hmm. And then it's also, we're running really fast, we're sprinting, we're startups. Even if we're a public MSO, like we're still a startup company. And some of the basic controls from the employee standpoint, from cybersecurity, from really just the people in these massive facilities, all of these things bring risk. And so I think what I've seen is not just how can we be a resource and how can we do a placement, but how can we actually be impactful, where you call us when you're in an oh shit situation and you need to not only recoup money, but you need to work through this problem. Yeah. And that's really where we come into play. And that's where I've been able to kind of find a passion and importance, I guess, in the business of cannabis.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And, you know, as you talk about the oh shit moment, right? We're sitting here recording in June 2023, and it's certainly been, you know, call it 18 months of pretty tough times for a lot of the cannabis industry. So I'm curious, I mean, what have you seen the market dynamics change for insurance as, you know, more companies have faced insolvency or gone through a receivership process or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think, you know, somebody that would be categorized as a service provider, the industry we're selling into, which obviously cannabis is, that's the lifeline. And I think if companies are not surviving, if their headcount is decreasing, if their revenues, you know, people's revenues are not necessarily decreasing, but they're having problems obviously with profitability, it prohibits the insurance industry in a good way from continuing to put out exorbitant pricing. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, when I go back to 2015, I was one of the first brokers doing it. There were many carriers in the space that were willing to underwrite cannabis. That has evolved quite a bit. There are lots of brokers from, you know, your biggest shops in the world, like your Aons and whomever else, to new businesses like Frontier. And, you know, I think that the thing that we're really trying to focus on at Frontier is we're a mix of operational expertise, technology, and insurance expertise. And again, like we believe and we've seen firsthand from being inside these companies, being invested, like just all of the work that my team has done collectively. Again, you need more than just the placement of a policy. And so again, to answer your question directly, the market has improved. You know, still you're dealing with some of the dynamics that are directly tied to banking that, although it's improved and there are more markets and more brokers where you can get quotes from, depending on what you're trying to do, it's still, you know, maybe 10x what a normal policy would be.
Yeah.
So the challenges persist, and we're dealing with the same 280E and federal banking stuff that everybody else is. And our goal is to offer products that, and this is not just Frontier, I think everybody in insurance, like we want the business to survive so that we can continue working with it. So certainly challenging, but I think in general, improvements and just more optionality over the last 8 years.
That's great. You know, and you mentioned some of the systemic issues that cannabis businesses face, right? And, you know, it's like any startup, any emerging sector, you're going to have a lot of challenges. And then in cannabis, you add to it, to your point, you know, insurance premiums are 10x the cost. While there's banking services available, those cost more. You're hit with 280E, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So how have you seen the strong operators really navigate those challenges of having a higher, call it baseline cost structure than other sectors?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a critical question. It's a good question. And I think people would answer it differently depending on what angle you're taking on cannabis. You know, for me, and in a kind of like a heartbreaking way a little bit, you know, people are obviously reducing headcount. People are spinning off, you know, various states that are not performing. our product lines, things like that. And so, it's the reality of it. But I think at the same time, just like tech startups, which I think obviously is a direct correlation to cannabis, people grew really fast. I think a lot of that is like the Canadian expansion, the size of those facilities, and kind of like how big that the Canadian businesses went in the early days, that kind of bled over to the US. And so, this is a resetting clearly of the market. And, I think that the best businesses will be able to rise to the top, but it's definitely, let's get lean. Let's figure out where our prohibitive cost centers are and where our revenue driving cost centers are. And let's make sure those are prioritized. And I would say it's interesting to watch. Like I'm in Connecticut, watching the tri-state, watching new markets kind of juggle this in different ways. And, you're in Colorado, like Colorado is obviously a pioneer in the business. And you guys have gone through not only being a pioneer, but maturity and kind of resetting. So I think every market's a little bit different, but to me, it's good business fundamentals, get lean, like figure out how to get to profitability, and the cream rises.
Yep, totally. And so as you talk about, a lot of these bigger players are rationalizing expenses. We've unfortunately seen a number of companies, go insolvent, and, a number of investors either leave the market entirely or say, hey, we're just putting pause on new investments for the time being. So I guess that's all to say, I think the sentiment has been until the last couple months where we've started to see things really rebound, like you're saying, it seems like the sentiment in the market has been a little bit bearish overall. So I'm curious, like, what is your perspective? Are you bullish on the long-term prospects still of cannabis? And are you seeing things, change more on the ground level?
Yeah, again, like being on the tri-state, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut are all new states relatively on the adult use side, at least. And like, let's take New Jersey, for example, where I've had direct involvement with a company called Hillview from 2018 to now. And I went through the process of writing applications, raising money, help building the team, like on and on. And I think New Jersey is arguably one of the best better states, just in the current landscape. And still, they're from a product suite standpoint, not everything is there, but the wholesale price per pound is probably the most healthy in the country. And you look at New York and kind of the fumbling maybe of some of the rollout, and people have different perspectives on it. There's so much opportunity. There's so many good entrepreneurs. There's amazing lawyers and attorneys, like my friend Lauren Rudick has been on the ground floor forever doing it and kind of fighting for the cause. And so, looking at all these different kind of dynamics, I believe in the opportunity. Again, I'm here 8 years in, and I think people like yourself, people like Judson on your last podcast, people, on the micro and social equity licenses, these are the futures, that the face of cannabis, and people who are committed to it long term. And I think I would be a fool to try to predict what's going to happen right now, because everybody has an opinion on the politics. I don't necessarily want to give one, and don't think like mine would be any more savvy than anybody else. In general, I believe in the longstanding and the future of this business. Consumers want it. My wife's grandparents asked me for cannabis. It's all over our lives, and I do believe, like, in pop culture, in just normal like suburbia where I now live, like cannabis is just as prevalent as wine, and same thing with over-the-counter medicine and topicals and things like that. So a long way of saying, like, I believe in this business long term. We're going through turmoil clearly right now, and I'm excited to see what the other side of this looks like.
Yeah.
What that prediction is, I don't know. And I think, like, as long as the core people are committed to it, I will continue to be committed and just believe it's going to be a long-term industry.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we feel the exact same way. And, I think there's a lot of comparisons that people draw, right, to like the tech bust in the early 2000s, right? Now that you still saw companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, right, rise like phoenixes. So, it's certainly not for the faint of heart, but I think that the ones who are able to survive today are going to thrive tomorrow.
Yeah, I fully believe it. I fully believe it. And I think, as we were saying, but before the recording, we're in 40 plus states with programs and counting. We're seeing advertising get more creative. We're just every day there's kind of a new opportunity. And I think because of all of the restrictions around the business, from the banking to whatever it is, people have really had to tap into their creativity, and now it's shining for those businesses that are able to withstand and again, like, overcome this period that we're in.
Totally. So maybe if we took a step back, I think folks are probably aware that insurance is just a massive business and sector overall, but don't necessarily understand how it actually all works. So could you dive a little bit further into, what is the business model in the insurance world look like?
Yeah, it's massive question. And I would say, insurance is confusing. It's complicated. There's a million different parts to it. The side of the business that I think cannabis companies interact with, that we're looking at from Frontier Risk, is, being able to service clients directly. So again, take like a new micro license, social equity license, anywhere in the tri-state. As I mentioned earlier, like, going through the application process, you have a brick and mortar location. You have, let's say you have a dispensary. You have not only the physical structure of the building, but whatever products and inventory you have in there. You have technology. You have the people, on and on. All of these things are insurable, and so it's really like, if you zoom out from a non-insurance perspective, it's looking at the assets of the business and how do you leverage and to an extent, like, hedge against a loss in the future. And our goal is to be able to take data about Jordan's new dispensary and paint it in a way to underwriting that kind of gets to a place where, okay, we know this is the premium to insure this value of the business and this property, and you kind of rinse and repeat as you go through the different parts of the business. But I think it's ensuring the humans, the people, the IP, the digital, the physical assets. And so that's really what it's about. And clearly, we're there for times when people have risks, and beyond that, like, you have a loss, you have a break-in in your dispensary, you have a cyber breach, one of your investors sues you. Like, all of these things happen, unfortunately, and it's not a cannabis thing. This is every industry, and we're there to offset that and make sure that companies can continue on operating and have a lifeline to be able to tap into, and so that it doesn't deplete their assets.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I would ask you, you're obviously doing a great job asking questions. What has your guys' experience been like, just from the fun side, from your, insurance perspective and needs? It's like, how's that for you guys?
Well, funny enough, we use Alpha Root for our GP insurance, which, didn't even realize until we met, so that was pretty cool kind of full circle type thing. But, it's been definitely a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a load off the shoulders, right? Just knowing that you have that security blanket if and when things go wrong. Because to your point, right? And especially, like, we're investors, right? Obviously, things don't always go right with every investment, or, you've got there's a lot of potential liabilities, right? That, are always out there, right? So having having a policy that, is going to protect you, protect your investors is really critical. Obviously it's a bummer that the premium is more expensive in our sector, but that is what it is, right? You got to do what you got to do. And that's why there's a premium to be had on the investment side as well, right? Because everything is harder and costlier and more challenging in cannabis today. But that's why, the returns are there too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, from my side of things and like being involved with Hillview, for example, we're selling flower. So it's a cool product. People obviously can touch it, can feel it. Insurance is tricky because you don't interact with it unless you're buying it, renewing it, or you have a loss. And I think, as I said, and as I've seen, like when you're operating a cannabis business at scale and for a number of years, things happen. It's the nature of the business. And I think the importance of it usually later on kind of shines through. And, furthermore, like back to the frontier side, like I believe in the value add of what really any service provider can do. And so like for us, it's not just, we can do the placements, we know the best markets, we know how to hopefully save people money and just make sure that they have adequate and solid policies. But beyond that, it's who are the best investors in this space? Who are the best attorneys? Who are the best security companies? What happens when you build a new extraction facility? Like all of these things, I think, again, just from a frontier perspective, from really anybody you're working with in cannabis, I think the value add is so critical because there's so many different things and aspects of the business you have to consider on a daily basis. And to be able to have a network of resources and people who, pardon my French, but like give a shit about the industry, understand the operational pain points, that's what's going to keep companies alive and allow them to get through a break-in, a fire, digital breach, whatever it is. So I think that part is critical to me.
That makes sense. And so as you guys look at insurance lines, what are some of the main factors that determine, what type of premium a cannabis operator would pay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, like as we say on PNC, which is your general liability products and property, so really more like on the plant touching side, your revenues is a huge indicator of that and a direct correlation. The values of your assets in any given location, which when you're an MSO, as we call it, like a statement of values, it becomes exorbitant. And people might have a couple $100 million of value across 5 different states. And then it's really about kind of your SOPs. So what are you doing to offset? Okay, we have an $80 million facility in South Florida. Like, what are we doing to protect that facility beyond just the insurance? So what does your security protocol look like? What is your employee handbook? Do you have OSHA training? Things like that all go into it. A good broker should be able to take all of those data points and paint just a clear picture of this is the business. This is why we believe that the risk is offset. And this is where the business is going in the future.
Yeah.
Furthermore, part of the exchange should be, Jordan, like I'm looking at your dispensary. These things are great, but you're missing, again, like something with your sprinklers or your fire alarm or just ahead of HR. Like, side note, employment practices liability is probably the number one area I've seen claims of just like bad management, lack of HR, lack of employee protocols. So it's really, I'd say like a collaboration between broker and client. Revenue drives it, value of asset drives it. But beyond that, it's really like understanding and painting the right picture of your SOPs. And then furthermore, like, can you actually implement the SOPs so that you are actually offsetting your risk? So that's
very helpful.
Yep.
Yeah. Now a question for you, non-insurance related, but you're talking earlier about how you've always had a relationship with cannabis and that, it's got a connection to music and to creativity. And I've certainly felt the same through my life and experience with cannabis. So I would just be curious to get your thoughts on, what do you think it is about cannabis that is maybe enabling of artistic creativity?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. something I've asked all sorts of people, including like rabbis, grandparents, like really, I genuinely have.
Yeah.
I think it taps into something that allows people to kind of take down their walls and just be a little less timid, at least for me, a little less kind of like whatever you want to put out into the world, you become your true self. And for me, and not to like create too much of a stereotype, but like I grew up in high school, I was into the Dead and Fish and Allman Brothers and all this stuff. I got into other kind of more expansive music as I went on, but it was something that as a kid, I was like, all right, this is cool. Like I understand it. I understand the softness, the community that I think the plant brings. And like even taking it to today, like working with Hillview and seeing kind of like reviews on the product, people are fanatical about it. And obviously like correlations to wine and other like craft products, but I think, I don't know, it's obviously something that goes back like decades and millennia of people, you know, philosophers and creatives and just people who think a little bit differently using the plant. And it's if you ask anybody who knew me when I was a kid, like this is always part of my life and my persona. And it's funny to me, like now as an adult, and I, you know, have a 2.5-year-old son, and this is part of my normal life, and I'm proud of it. And I think, you know, people like yourself, Jordan, and other professionals that I know that have created great careers in this business and ancillary to it, it's really exciting. And that's one of the things that like keeps me driven, is like, it got me to this point. I have a family, like I have a house, like all of these things I genuinely can attribute to cannabis. And a lot of that is like going back to my early days of just creating a relationship with the plant, back to like high and why, becoming a student, understanding the social parts of it. And I also would be remiss, I want to shout out Lulu and Jacoby from Revelry. I think they're actually like Jacoby's in Colorado sometimes, but they have a great networking event in New York that they've been pushing for a long time and are still doing it. And I think these are the things that keep me motivated. Even when I'm not like attending so many events anymore, it's inspiring to see people still make that connection to the plant and still have that passion to it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been such a blast.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So if there may be potential clients that are looking for cannabis insurance, or I don't know if you guys are looking to hire or anything like that, are there any ways that folks could or should reach out to you?
Oh yeah, but both, please. You can find us, we're at frontierrisk.com. And you can email me, jsamuels@frontierrisk.com. Would love to talk to you. And again, Jordan, I really appreciate you doing this and just being thoughtful beyond obviously putting dollars to work. You're obviously a student of the game as well. So awesome to see, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And really love what you guys are doing for the industry. It's a much needed product and service, and look forward to continuing to build this industry with you, my friend.
Likewise.
All right. Take care and have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you, man.